A scathing new book has shaken the White House to its core. The US president dismisses it as a work of fiction, but could its revelations actually end his presidency? I'm Imran Gafta, and today's newsmaker is Donald Trump. There's never a dull day in the Trump administration. The release of Michael Wolff's book, Fire and Fury, has caused quite a frenzy, already becoming a bestseller. But could it actually bring down the president? The book paints an unflattering picture of Trump, questioning his mental health and his ability to grasp basic policy. But the former TV star says it's completely false and calls the author a fraud. A large part of the book is based on conversations Michael Wolff had with Steve Bannon, Trump's former chief strategist and a man at the heart of the Trump White House up until he was fired. So how much damage could this latest scandal cause the US president? Natalie Perhonen explores.
In the era of social media, it's the printed word that has taken the Trump administration by surprise.
The book that shook Washington and ended the relationship between President Trump and Steve Bannon.
Because I myself, just last night, was speaking to people inside the White House who are saying, holy cow.
Michael Wolff's book, Fire and Fury, provides a scathing look at life inside President Trump's inner circle and life in the White House. Wolff describes a president who struggles to comprehend advice from his own team.
He didn't process information in any conventional sense. He didn't read. He didn't really even skim. Some believe that for all practical purposes, he was no more than semi-literate.
In the book, Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, accused Donald Trump Jr. of treasonous and unpatriotic behavior for meeting a Russian lawyer in Trump Tower during the presidential campaign. Bannon has since walked back that claim by issuing a public apology, but his ties to the Trump team have been cut. And that could signify a shift away from the far-right base Bannon brought with him. Michael Wolff is standing by his work.
If I left out anything, it's probably stuff that was even more damning. It's that bad. It's that bad. What happened here? What's going on here? This is, you know, I think not an exaggeration and not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable to say this is 25th Amendment kind of stuff.
In the US Constitution, the 25th Amendment includes a section about the transition of power to the Vice President, if the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Trump says he's more than qualified and mentally stable to carry out the top job. He says his two greatest assets have been mental stability and being, like, really smart. And he went from very successful businessman to top TV star, to President of the United States. And that would qualify as not smart, but genius, and a very stable genius at that. But the fact Trump has even had to address the contents of what he dismisses as a fake book and sell his credentials after almost a year in office has placed even more scrutiny on his presidency. Natalie Perhonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from San Diego is Harry Litman. He's a former US attorney and deputy assistant attorney general. From London, we have Andre Walker, a founding member of Breitbart UK and Steve Bannon's former colleague. Completing our panel from Miami is John Cardillo. He hosts the radio talk show Off the Cuff. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Harry, let me begin with you and ask you, if you've read the book and what you thought of it. Even if you haven't, what do you think of the revelations in the book?
Right. I have read the book. Like many other people, I tore through it at 9 a.m. on Friday morning. I mean, look, it's always been a tumultuous presidency. But the book has added to, it hasn't created, but it's added to this sense of crisis and grave concern in the White House. The thing that is noteworthy to me about the book is every single person, this is not a Bannon versus Trump dynamic, everybody who talks in that book comes out with the same portrayal of the president as a deeply unstable, raging child. And with all that portends for national security and world security. There are also, for me as a former prosecutor, there are many nuggets in the book that somebody like Robert Mueller, whom I've worked with, is going to be able to mine to really turn up the heat on individual actors, Kushner, Trump Jr., and of course the president himself. So there's a sense of real crisis now afoot. And in general, the defenses that you hear from on behalf of Trump and others don't seem to be at all on the merits. Everybody seems to acknowledge what's in the book, but they just try to change the subject and talk about other things like Hillary Clinton.
Right. John Cardillo, so we have Bannon at the center of all of this. It's the book plus Bannon and this nasty breakup. Bannon recently said he wasn't talking about Donald Trump Jr., he wasn't calling him treasonous for meeting with Russians. He was talking about Manafort. Whether you believe him or not, the fact that Bannon considers the meeting with the Russians as possibly treasonous or collusion, doesn't that mean that maybe the Democrats are right?
Absolutely not. Look, the book is a complete fabrication. Michael Wolff's previous book found 13 alleged sources demanding that Wolff retract their statements because they never said it. I speak to people in the West Wing all the time. People are saying, we never said what Wolff is attributing to us. And if we did say it, it was out of context. It was a joke. Wolff played fast and loose. And with respect to Harry Litman, Mr. Litman was a Clinton administration appointee. So of course, he's going to say that this has tidbits for Robert Mueller and that it's about Hillary Clinton, because ultimately, this is deflection from what appear to be crimes by Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin. The book is complete junk. I actually interviewed Dr. Sebastian Gorka on my show right before we were doing this show here. He refused to be interviewed by Wolff because he said Wolff's reputation as a far-left political hitman was well known, and those inside the White House, and we suspect that the people that gave Wolff access were those never-Trump or holdovers inside the West Wing who wanted to damage the presidency. I think at the end of the day, this book is being laughed at. The publisher should be ashamed of themselves for allowing a person to write a book when that person has a history of fabricating sources. And I think this will be forgotten about next week.
But John, let me ask you, if the book is suggesting that this is an insecure and unstable man, and it comes out, and the president's the most powerful man in the world, and then he issues cease and desist threats against both Bannon and the book, doesn't that in some way vindicate what the book is saying? Maybe it means that there's some truth to it. If he's taking it so seriously, doesn't it mean that there might be some truth to it?
Absolutely not. Quite the contrary. If somebody were to insult me and fabricate sources who make things up about me, you can bet your bottom dollar that my attorney is going to fire off a cease and desist letter, and I'm going to take very aggressive legal action. Who wouldn't? That, you know, our system here in the United States is based upon the fact that you exercising your legal rights, you seeking remedies available to you under the laws of your state, the federal government, and the Constitution is in no way indicative of wrongdoing on your part. You just don't want to be smeared. I think the president is 100% right.
Andre Walker, as an employee of Breitbart...
Of course, Trump did not do that.
Just a second,
What Trump did was issue the letter, but then back away.
Okay, fair enough, Harry. Andre, let me bring you in. As an employee of...
What Hillary did was allow Huma Abedin to skate on crimes by using influence.
Okay,
Look, you were a Clinton appointee.
Let's park off Hillary for a second. Okay, John, if you don't mind, I want to bring in Andre because we have three people on the panel here. Andre, as an employee of Breitbart, I'm curious, do you find yourself sort of torn between Trump and Bannon in this fight?
Well, first of all, I'm a former employee of Breitbart, and I don't think I am at all. I mean, I think Steve Bannon's made it 100% clear that it was a mistake to have spoken to Wolff at all. I think he's made it clear, like everybody else has made it clear, that things were misquoted and taken out of context. For goodness sake, the first page of this book says that the Wolff has rephrased things, and so he's taken things, I think, completely out of context. As an example, everybody I know whose dad has a comb-over, they rib them about it and make a few jokes. But Wolff sort of implies that Ivanka Trump is really seriously ridiculing her father in the White House rather than joshing a little bit. Similarly, he says that the president goes to bed at 6:30 p.m. I mean, are we to believe that these 4 a.m. tweets by Donald Trump are not, in fact, by Donald Trump, but by somebody else? So I think what he does is he's taken a grain of truth, which might be Donald Trump went to bed at 6:30 p.m. PM one night because he wasn't feeling well, and has turned it into something much, much bigger. So I think that what this talks to is the level of dishonesty by Wolf. I think it's completely unfair to mischaracterize things in these ways. And I think what has happened is that there is 10% truth in this book, but it has now been so spun and so taken out of context and so reworded as to make it practically worthless as a piece of source material.
Harry, let me ask you, playing devil's advocate here, about the timing.
Yeah.
Is it just the case that so many people, both on the left and perhaps on the right, those Republicans who don't like Trump, just want these stories to be true because they want proof that he is unfit to lead? Might that be the case?
Well, you have to understand, this is not that the book comes in and it confirms rather than initiates all the criticisms against Trump. With respect to both your panelists, Trump is now by far the most unpopular president of all time. The broad middle simply has abandoned this notion that's being propounded by your panelists that he's some kind of normal person. It may or may not be that he's the sort of cheeseburger and cable TV at 6:30 p.m. Account is 100% accurate. It doesn't matter. The point is the broad details and the unanimous account of everyone who goes in the Oval Office, and even more importantly, of course, the factual details that Robert Mueller is gathering. It's not a funny back and forth political battle. It's a matter of grave concern that you have a potential buffoon. Sure, go ahead.
Can I respond to that? I think that is the issue. The issue is the devil's in the detail. Because fundamentally, if these stories are mischaracterized, then what that turns into, it turns from what I contend, that Donald Trump is using extremely robust language to get what he wants from America, and it turns it into he is a nutter raging. So the devil in the detail, that is the important element of it. And when you mischaracterize what Donald Trump's staff are saying, then you change this from a deliberate strategy by Donald Trump into making it appear to be something that's crazy, which is exactly what this book intends to do.
John Cardillo, do you think Bannon's the crazy one?
Right, if you know. Let me return for 1 second to the point that John made about the cease.
Harry responded,
yeah, very
John.
quickly,
Harry,
the cease and desist letter. Thank you. On the cease and desist letter, of course, Trump immediately folded, because what would happen had he gone through with this legal threat, he would have had to sit for a deposition. He would, under penalty of perjury, have to tell the truth, and of course, that's what he needs to avoid more than anything.
Okay. John Cardillo, is Bannon the crazy one?
No, look, Harry's point is simply ridiculous. He's the sitting president. He doesn't have time to deal with this. Look, the timing of the book is very conspicuous.
The law says he
right
must.
On the heel. The timing of the book came on the heels of the Department of Justice reopening Hillary's email investigation and reopening the investigation into the Clinton Foundation. We now know that Huma Abedin transferred more classified information to her husband's laptop. So I understand why Harry's deflecting. His former bosses, the people that appointed him, are probably going to go to prison, whereas Robert Mueller has found zero evidence of collusion on Team Trump. He only got him on bogus process crimes, and Paul Manafort on a financial crime from 2006. Now, is Bannon crazy? No. Steve Bannon is a smart strategist who messed up. He said things that he shouldn't have said. He said things out of context, but more importantly, he trusted a far-left political hitman. But all of this deflection and all of these details that are trying to be spun don't take away from the fact that the Office of Inspector General, our Department of Justice's report, is due next week. It's going to be damning to the Obama DOJ and Comey's FBI. And I do suspect Huma Abedin will be criminally charged. As Harry well knows, as a former senior Justice Department official, there is no excusing away classified information on Huma Abedin's husband's unsecure laptop. This is why the left is freaking out and trying to make this book something it isn't. Bad things are coming for their people.
Harry?
Yes, so I'm here to tell you this is a completely bizarre fantasy in terms of what's going on in the States. This overall attempt to make this about Huma and Hillary is complete mischaracterization. In fact, everyone is focused
said
on
there was an investigation,
Trump,
Harry.
as they should be, and on Mueller, who of course is a solid professional. You have a Manichaean worldview in which there is Donald Trump and everybody else, including Mueller, a lifelong Republican, is a, quote, far-left operative. It's just not the way other people see it here.
Andre, let me
Well,
talk.
everybody in the States sees Mueller as biased. Everybody saw the people he stacked his team with.
Clearly not
and
everybody.
Your own department.
Okay.
Last point. Your own Department of
in
Justice,
fact,
Harry,
it's risible.
admitted there were your own Department of Justice said Hillary's emails are back under investigation. The Clinton Foundation is under investigation, and more classified emails were
John,
found
so
on Wiener's laptop.
it's a tale of two investigations for you. So, okay, and you like one and you don't like the other one. Andre Walker, let's talk policy now and the Republicans in general and the Trump administration looking forward. Isn't this an opportunity for Trump to say, now that I'm no longer with Bannon, Bannon's not been around for a while now, but now that it got to this point with this book particularly, are we going to see Trump now cast away all the kind of alt-right, nativist, populist stuff that we saw bring him to the presidency and a base that he inherited along with Bannon's influence? Are we going to see Trump become more of a sort of normal Republican rather than this new kind of Republican that we saw during the last election?
Well, I think it's important to remember that that Steve Bannon and the Mercers backed Ted Cruz. So I don't think Donald Trump inherited anything from Steve Bannon, though obviously unity between the two of them, I think, will assist at re-election time. Look, you know, I look at the approval rating figures and I think that they are satisfactory for where we're up to at the moment. They're not brilliant, but they're satisfactory. And the reason is because Trump voters are incredibly hardy. They've been there right from the start when he was polling 1% and have built up slowly as time has gone on. They have proved themselves to be very, very insulated from complaints. And I'll tell you why I think that is. Because actually, when you take away the bluster, when you take away the tough language, when you take away the rhetoric, when you take away the late-night tweeting, Donald Trump is achieving his agenda. The reason people are going mad is because he is one of the first presidents ever to be criticised for actually doing what he promised to do during the election. I think the reform of the tax code, the reduction of corporation tax, is going to enable him to pay for that important infrastructure finance that he's desperate to put through. I think there are every element of his policy, whether it's pushing NATO to behave properly in the defence of the United States of America, whether it's on reform, whether it's on getting the appointments that he wants. I think Donald Trump is doing actually a fantastic job. Okay. And I think what upsets people is that his strategy of being extremely robust and then pushing back is working.
Harry Litman, you're focusing on the bluster and the noise, whereas, as Andre's saying, when you look at the facts, this guy's doing a good job. What do you think?
Right. Well, look, I don't think this is a normal policy back and forth. I would, of course, dispute whether the tax bill, which is the only thing he's achieved, is good for America at all. I would point to the general concern that we've ceded leadership in the world. But I would put it all to the side. It's not a policy debate mainly now. It's a debate about the basic fitness of what everyone seems to portray as a raging buffoon in the, in the White House.
It's unfair, though, to say. It's unfair to say, though. It's unfair to say, look, he's achieving his policy aims, but that's completely irrelevant because we don't like the way he's doing it. I think the two are intrinsically linked.
No, I'm sorry. I take your point. All I'm saying is these policy. John, go ahead.
What I'm going to say is, first of all, to Harry's point, Harry is saying Trump is a buffoon, he's got low approval ratings, but using the same sources that had Hillary Clinton with a 92% chance of winning 2 days before the election. Trump hasn't only gotten tax reform passed, he's systematically dismantled all of Obama's disastrous regulation. Business is soaring. The Dow broke 25,000 here in the United States for the first time in history. The NASDAQ broke 7,000 due to tax reform. $4 trillion with a T, $4 trillion will be repatriated to Americans and American businesses to stimulate the economy. We're seeing 4% growth in our gross domestic product. Those are achievements. ISIS is crushed. North Korea picked up a phone to talk to South Korea. These are massive achievements that Obama couldn't achieve in 8 years. Bill Clinton couldn't achieve in 8 years. Trump got them done in under a year. So to call the guy a buffoon is just histrionics from the left. They're a nervous wreck that he's eradicating the disastrous Democratic agenda.
Let me speak briefly to Obama versus Trump. Every country in the world, go ahead.
Come in, Harry.
Every country in the world, with the exception of Russia and Israel, thinks that Trump is a loss from Obama. Everybody in the country thinks
because Obama
the same.
I would be
glad to debate.
Obama laid down for
John, I let you go. John, I let you go. John, please let me finish. You've got the same kind of bullying as your patron. Look, the point is not I would be glad to debate the bona fides and how it works for regular pocketbook Americans, the few things that Trump has achieved. I just want to emphasize for people in Europe what the real gestalt is over here, which is not the back and forth about these policy issues or the deep concern about Trump is achieving. It's the real crisis, Watergate-style crisis, that we have a constitutional problem that may result in the removal of a sitting president of the United States for the first time. That's what all news stations, including Fox, are focused on.
Okay, so let me add to that for a second. John, just a second. John, just a second. So here's a man who was, in the DOJ. He knows a thing or two about the legal machinations of the federal system in the United States. He believes there's a possibility that the president will be removed. Why is this so kind of laughable to you? Tell me, John.
Because I spent half my professional career in law enforcement as well. It is laughable. Mueller has nothing. Look, I'm not a bully, but Harry, like the capitulating wimp Obama, wants to lay down and let the bullies of the world walk all over him. Donald Trump isn't doing that. So yeah, all the bad guys and the zealots and the despots and the dictators in the world wish they had Obama back because he was their doormat. And Harry apparently thinks that's acceptable. I don't. There is no case for impeachment. Mueller can't even find a shred of evidence of Russia collusion because it doesn't exist. He got 2 people on bogus process crimes and another on a financial crime. The guy's been going at it for a year. And with regards to General Flynn, all he had was the process crime. That's why he took a plea. Now, Harry full well knows when a federal prosecutor has somebody on a higher crime, he makes them plea on that higher crime so he can hold something over them. Oh. He doesn't make them plea to the crime with the least penalty. That's 100% false.
That's exactly what he doesn't.
No, it is not, Harry. You know it's not false. You know it's not false.
And there's nothing a process crime about lying and obstruction of justice.
It's a process. Hold on, Harry. Now you're being factually accurate.
Let me say one thing about what Mueller has.
Let me finish my point.
Let me say one thing about
hold on, Harry. Let John finish his point and then you come in.
Harry. No, hold on, Harry. You just lied on international television. No one was charged with obstruction of justice, only with the process crime of misstatements. Be honest. Let's be honest. Don't act like Michael Wolff and lie on international television.
Harry Littman, I'm going to give you the final word because you've been outnumbered here. Okay. I'm sorry, Andre. I'm not going to give you the final word. Harry Littman, come in.
No,
sorry, Andre.
I'm enjoying this.
Thank you. I'm outnumbered here. I'm outnumbered here, but not in the United States. My final word will be about Mueller. Nobody, John and nobody else, knows what Mueller has or doesn't have. Mueller is a rock-solid professional, respected on all sides, who talks only when he has the evidence to present to a court. We are all waiting to see what he has, and it's completely fanciful to assert, as John now has, that Mueller has nothing.
Harry Littman, Andre Walker, and John Cardillo, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. See you soon. Still to come, Israel tells African refugees to go back home or face time in jail. Could they end up being sent to their deaths? And the Iranian Revolutionary Guard says the unrest is over. Were the people really calling for a change in power? Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Leave the country or face imprisonment. It's a dilemma thousands of African refugees now face in Israel, although they've been given an incentive. Israel is offering each individual $3,500 and a free plane ticket to return home. But what are they returning to? The majority of them say they're fleeing conflict and persecution, and to leave would put their lives at risk. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calls them infiltrators who threaten the country's Jewish character. So, is Israel unfairly targeting African refugees? Randolph Nogel takes a look.
למסתננים יש ברירה פשוטה, לשתף איתנו פעולה ולצאת מרצון בדרך מכובדת, בדרך אנושית ובדרך חוקית, או כמובן נצטרך להפעיל את הכלים האחרים העומדים לרשותנו, גם הם לפי החוק. אני מקווה שיבחרו לשתף איתנו פעולה.
Deportation or detention, an ultimatum put forth by the Israeli government. Part of a long campaign to push African asylum seekers out. Human rights groups say the move is in violation of international refugee law and puts the lives of thousands from Eritrea and Sudan in danger. And the head of the UN Refugee Agency, Filippo Grandi, has said Israel must not forget its own painful history of migration and exile.
There are 38,000 asylum seekers here. Israel has the capacity to accept them, to integrate them, and instead is paying a poorer country to take its small share of refugees, a country like Rwanda, which is already hosting hundreds of thousands of refugees.
There had been reports that Rwanda and Uganda had agreed to take in some of the refugees. But those two countries now deny any such agreement was ever made. Israel's government says its plan is humane and voluntary, despite the fact that those who refuse to leave could face indefinite detention. Hundreds of African refugees in Israel are currently being held in the Hot Lot Detention Center, which is expected to close later this year. For refugees who have managed to find work and learn the language, there have been other government maneuvers to get them to leave. Last year, the government implemented a tax plan to take away 20% of their wages, which they can later access only if they leave Israel.
They call it voluntary, but involuntary. If you press someone and to leave your country, it is not voluntary, it's involuntary. You make his life very hard and hard from day to day. So he leaves the country. It's not voluntary. So they want us to leave the country because of our skin.
Critics of the campaign say it's racially motivated because its advocates perceive African migrants as a demographic threat. Others say the timing is political, with corruption investigations against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ongoing and the possibility of early elections looming. But for those who will be affected, some say they'd rather go to jail than go back to their homeland. A vulnerability that's being ignored by a government that prefers to call African asylum seekers infiltrators. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Tel Aviv is Yigal Shtayem. He's an activist and co-founder of Soup Levinsky, an NGO that provides for refugees in Israel. Also joining us from Tel Aviv, we have Walpurga Engelbrecht. She's the representative for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Israel. And from Bridgetown in Barbados, we have Seth Frantzman. He's a journalist with the Jerusalem Post. I thank you all for joining us. Walpurga, let me begin with you and get the UNHCR position on this. This idea that African migrants get some cash and a ticket to leave or they face time in jail. From your perspective, is that ethical? Is it moral? Is it humane? Is it legal?
I think the main issue is here to very much look at it. Who are these people who are being subject to relocation? And what is most important is that one needs to look first at the numbers. I mean, if we see how many are affected or how many Israel hosts currently, then we are talking about some 35,000 Eritreans and Sudanese by the end of September 2017, as announced by BIBA, the Ministry of Interior. And in previous times, there were some 55,000 Eritreans and Sudanese, hence already some 20,000 departed through various means. And at the same time, if we look at it from an international law point of view, I think it's important to mention is that the order shifts the burden to third countries without meeting the required benchmarks. First, UNHCR is not necessarily in principle against the transfer of asylum seekers, provided it is burden sharing and not burden shifting.
Seth Frantzman, are you comfortable with them being labeled as infiltrators and treated like infiltrators?
No, I mean, I think, we go back to the history when up until 2013 or so, large numbers of people were crossing the Sinai. Many of these people had been victims of human trafficking, so they were kind of dumped on Israel's border. And they were part of a large migration of refugees and economic migrants who were trying to reach, most of them were trying to reach Europe. Very few of these people were not trying to reach Israel as a destination. They were the same people that ended up in Libya and ended up going across the sea Some of them ended up in Turkey. So I don't think it's fair to label them infiltrators, probably, but I think it is fair to have a discussion about how many of them are refugees or asylum seekers or just economic migrants, and also to ask those people what they would like, where they would like to end up.
Yigal Shtayem, Netanyahu has a plan. It seems as if he has the democratic mandate behind this plan. There aren't tens of thousands of people out on the streets opposing this. If this is what the will of the majority want, who are you to fiddle with that?
First of all, I think Netanyahu is about to commit a crime in the name of the Israeli citizens. There's no doubt that while he is in pressure, he's under investigation on a few subjects. He is really keen to look for the love of even the right wing in Israel. He's meeting them, he's encouraging them, and of course, this horrible plan, this crime that's about to happen, deporting people, innocent people, that a very simple search in Google engine would tell you that they come from a dictatorship in Eritrea or from wars in Sudan. It's very easy to know. These people were not on their way to Europe. They just escaped anywhere they could. And by the way, they're not infiltrators. They got visa when they got through the Sinai Desert to Israel. Each and every one they have in their pocket a visa they have to stamp every two or 3 months. So they were accepted here, and the Israeli state that was founded as grandsons and granddaughters of Holocaust survivors should be more sensitive about the fate of people who look for asylum.
Mm-hmm. So, Seth, is Yigal guilt-tripping other Israelis by saying this is a country founded by Holocaust survivors, therefore we should do better? Or does he have a point in saying that this is a crime to send people back to countries like Eritrea, where things are not great?
As far as I know, almost none of them are being sent back to Eritrea. So I mean, actually, for several years, Israel had a very successful program in which I think 3,000 of them ended up moving to Canada. So I don't know what, he bases his data on in terms of whether or not these people want to stay in Israel.
That's not true.
Or whether they were searching to get to Europe.
Completely false.
No, I think in general, I mean...
There was no plan like that. It's completely false what you say.
As a country that based on Holocaust survivors, there's lots of people in Israel, including Arab citizens. So every country has a duty and a duty to take care of refugees.
Okay.
That's the whole purpose of the international law. I don't think Israel has some special responsibility. I think countries that committed the Holocaust, like those countries, by the way, probably have a more special responsibility.
So let me ask Yigal.
Of course
Yigal, tell me why you said what Seth.
Tell me responsible about it.
Okay, tell me why you think what Seth said is false. He's saying people aren't being sent back to Sudan or Eritrea. That's false. He's saying they're going to places like Canada.
No. There's no plan for immigrants, for asylum seekers in Israel towards Europe. They're getting jailed here without trial. They're getting persecuted in the streets. They're not allowed to work. I worked with them for the last 6 years. I know what I'm talking about. I think what's the Netanyahu's plan is just going to be the worst of the last 10 years. These people deserve to be treated in the human rights standard, a different one, especially in Israel. And it's completely false. Nobody allowed them to get to the whole idea of the third country is an imagination of Netanyahu. There was Rwanda and Uganda, both countries, said there's no agreement for people, asylum seekers to get there.
Let me ask.
Somebody is trying to get rid of people.
Okay, good point. Let's ask Valpurga from the UNHCR, because maybe she'd be able to shed some light on this. There was a suggestion that there was a deal with third-party countries, Rwanda, Uganda. They both came out and said, hey, there's no deal whatsoever. We're not taking anybody. So what is going on? Is there a deal or is there no deal, Valpurga?
Unfortunately, I cannot provide the necessary clarification since UNHCR has not been party or privy to any of the specifics of the agreements. We only learned ourselves about agreements in the media where initially the foreign minister came out and said, yes, indeed, that they are in discussions with Israel in order to receive an increased number of relocatees from Rwanda. However, the latest statement from the deputy foreign minister is saying, no, we don't have such an agreement. We can only say that based on past relocations to these two countries and the interviews we have been able to conduct with some of the relocatees certainly provide some confirmation that there is some form of an agreement between Israel and the countries as for the past. As for the future, it is not clear, as I just mentioned before.
Yigal, is the policy racist?
Of course it is. You know, the smallest group of immigrants in Israel are these asylum seekers from Eritrea and Sudan. They're about 0.004 of the population. Now you have about 10 times bigger groups that nobody is trying to deport at all. Now, the way Israel does this, I'm ashamed to say this because I would like my country to treat people better, is just not checking their request for asylum. They just don't check it. Same people from the same group, from the same countries get about 85% of them. They get to be refugees in Europe. How come in Israel is a zero? It must be racist. There's no other reason.
Seth Franzman, one of the Eritrean asylum seekers...
I'm sorry to say this.
Interesting. I mean, one of the Eritrean asylum seekers featured in our report preceding the discussion, Teklit Michael, said, quote, "They want us to leave the country because of our skin. This is the only point." Seth, they feel if they were Norwegian or if they were white, it would have been a different story altogether. It's because they're black and African, that's why Israel wants to get rid of them. Is there any truth to that, Seth?
Look, I think there is certainly a lot of incitement and racist things that have been made by politicians over the years. So there's clearly a degree of racism. But I also know, just in personal experience in Israel, also that if you're European or you want to basically live in Israel and you're a Christian or you think it's interesting, they also make it very difficult for you. I think Israel in general makes it very, very difficult for foreigners. I think there's also a certain level of racism as an incitement, specifically targeting these 37,000 African migrants and refugees. And by the way, the numbers, I think, are not correct. If Israel's a country of 8 million, these people are about half of 1%.
Okay.
So it's not a tiny number. If you compared it to Europe, it would be equivalent to 4 million people or something.
And Seth, if somebody from the outside looks in and says, yes, sure, Israel defines itself...
What's the danger of keeping them here?
Hold on, just for a second, Seth, and we'll get that answered in a second. Just a second, Yigal. Seth, if somebody from the outside looks in and says, okay, fair enough, Israel defines itself as a Jewish state, but what does that mean when Benjamin Netanyahu says too many African migrants will threaten our Jewish character? How is that not the same as somebody who's maybe a white nationalist in Europe saying too many black people, too many Arabs, too many Muslims will threaten our white European Christian identity? How is it not the same as that?
I mean, I think in some ways it is the same as any country. For instance, whether it's Turkey or the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, for instance, doesn't take in all of the expats that live there.
Okay,
the local.
Okay, but that's the UAE. People. Yeah, but then the UAE has a very unfair policy, and that's. I mean, we can discuss that in the policy, right?
I think Israel also has an unfair policy. I mean, I think that it would be great. It would be great if Israel were to say, okay, we're going to take 5,000 or 10,000 and give them citizenship, and we're going to encourage the other 20,000 that remain, if they'd like, to move somewhere else, especially in the West, where perhaps they would prefer to live. So I think it would be great if Israel took in a certain percentage of them.
But is Netanyahu taking the Jewish identity as an excuse for a form of racial supremacism?
I don't know about racial supremacism, but I mean, Israel is defined as or looks at itself as a Jewish state, and it tends to not take in large numbers of refugees or asylum seekers. That's the nature of Israel, and I think that's certainly the nature of this government, and I think also previous governments, by the way, which didn't take in very few, almost any.
So Yigal, you have all these high hopes for the wrong country. This is the nature of Israel, according to Seth.
First of all, that's basically not true. About a third of the population is Arab Israelis, okay? And 75% only are Jewish. I mean, first of all, this is not a Jewish country. We accepted as a country so many people, so many minorities from all around the world. So it's not a Jewish state per se. That's first thing I want to say. Second thing is, how come so many other immigrants from other countries are left alone? Nobody's deporting them. How come Israel is bringing people to work here from India, from all kinds of places, and they have problems with these specific people that are asylum seekers? It makes you wonder, how come Netanyahu uses these people that were hated so much by racists? How come he supports them? What's becoming of Israel by having this crazy plan of deporting them even by force? I have to say, I knew people that were deported here and didn't survive, including kids that were deported from Israel in 2014 to Sudan. Kids I knew, and they didn't survive.
Valpurga, let me ask you. I mean, and that's harrowing to hear. Valpurga, if Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called you in, sat you down and said, okay, how can I do this better? What would you suggest to him?
We would certainly suggest as UNHCR to focus on positive solutions. As UNHCR, in cooperation with the international community, we can work together. We can see how, through more positive solutions, be it resettlement, be it support of sponsorship programs such as being offered by Canada, or support of family reunion, where a family member has been granted refugee status in one of the European countries and would like to reunify, to work on these solutions, but in turn actually then see for those where a third country solution is not possible, to provide improved protection until these persons can return in safety and dignity.
Okay, well, those are the hopes, and the deadline has been set, end of March. This is when the African migrants and refugees have until they either accept the deal or go to jail. We'll be keeping a close eye on the story here on the Newsmakers. But for the moment, I thank you all. Seth Franzman, Yigal Shtayem, and Valpurga Engelbrecht. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.
But the concern of the people is not economy alone. People have something to say about corruption, about transparency. They want greater transparency on issues. The people want to be informed on what is happening in legislation and its implementation in the judiciary and other spheres, so they are able to form a judgment that we receive all the criticisms of the public from media broadcasts as carelessness.
It was Iran's worst protests since 2009. What started with just hundreds of demonstrators quickly spread to more than 80 towns and cities across the country. More than 1,000 people were arrested and at least 20 people lost their lives as police fought with demonstrators. But Iran's Revolutionary Guard says the unrest is over. It says the protests were orchestrated by the US, Israel and Saudi Arabia. So, was this down to external factors, or do Iranians really want reform and a change in government? Well, to answer those questions and more is Iranian journalist Masih Alinejad, who joins us from New York. She launched My Stealthy Freedom, an online social movement fighting for Iranian women's personal choice not to wear a hijab in public. Masih, good to talk to you. The protests happened. They're over. The government took control again. So does that suggest that maybe the people don't really want regime change, but they want some change within the regime?
Listen, this time when people took the street, they were chanting against the whole regime. I was involved in, the news, daily news, receiving videos, footages from people inside Iran. This time, the demonstration, unlike 2009, was about starvation, was about frustration, was about people asking for having a better life, food, electricity, water. And these people were fed up with all the corruption. That is why, unlike 2009 election, when people were just chanting where my vote is, they were asking for some change. But this time, I'm hearing that people, from the first time, the slogan were really radical, and people were asking all the clerics must be gone.
Right.
They were chanting against the dictatorship.
Yeah, but that tends to happen everywhere, right? I mean, I don't want to sort of try and pour cold water over this, but even, for example, at the Occupy Wall Street protest, while people might have been angry at economic issues, you would find a big group of people there saying, hey, the United States is a fascist country, we are a terrible dictatorship, and so on. You're gonna find these sorts of things, but looking at the trigger of these particular protests, 12% inflation, 40% youth unemployment, it seemed as if the economy was at the heart of all of this.
Let me interrupt you.
Okay.
You compare. Let me interrupt you. You compare the demonstrations in Iran with the Wall Street Journal. People were gathering here peacefully. How many people died here in the United States of America?
So,
I'm going to tell you that.
So I think you misread my analogy.
In Iran.
Okay, so fair enough.
There were more than 1,000 people were in prison. Right now in prison, more than 20 people got killed. And just today, I'm going to share a news about Sina Qambari, a 23-year-old man who has died in prison under suspicious circumstances. We cannot compare this to what's going on in New York. Of course, people are unhappy everywhere, but in Iran, when you're unhappy, you're going to get shot or into prison or beaten to death.
So let me then try and address this again with you. Again, I think you misread my analogy. I'm not saying it's exactly the same as the United States. And according to the best available analysis, the United States has a healthier democracy than Iran's system. But what I'm saying again, maybe it was mostly about the economy, and undoubtedly you're going to have people, just like in other protests around the world, who are going to be saying bigger things because they're angry about the economy, about inflation, about lack of jobs, and so on. But just because a bunch of people are saying bigger things and angry at the regime doesn't necessarily mean it's a revolution, or is it maybe something that can be addressed economically?
Let me give you a better picture of what's going on in Iran. After 2009 election, that demonstration was about, that demonstration, obviously everyone around the world knows that it was about the election, yeah? In that time, not the West, not the, President of the United States, Obama, they do nothing. They didn't support the demonstrations, but it's still two presidential challengers, Mousavi and Karoubi, they are the main pillars of the, revolution in Iran. They are under house arrest, being labeled that the demonstration 2009 was organized and supported by the West without they supporting the people, the green movement in Iran.
Okay, but that was 2009.
Now,
yes.
What's going on in Iran? It's not about economic. It's not just about economic, because from the first day, you didn't hear any slogan about, the price of egg, but the main slogan was about the dictatorship, about, people wanted a greater freedom. People didn't want the clerics to be in power or sending their money to Gaza, Lebanon, Syria. And then people are suffering from, of course, poverty. But the thing is, for months and months, I have been covering the news of those people who took the street peacefully and gathering, in front of the parliament, teachers, workers, miners, women rights activists. So they were asking for a better life and greater freedom. What happened to them? They were all oppressed. Teachers are in prison right now. Bus driver are in prison right now. Workers, miners got lashes. Those women who condemned acid attack they are in prison.
Right.
Those people who thrown acid on women's face, they are free. So you cannot say that this is just about the economy. It's about the corruption. It's about the government who do not believe in freedom and who want to oppress and kill those people who peacefully protest and who peacefully want to express themselves. That is why this time, when people took the street, they were chanting about the corruption and democracy, economy and political freedom and personal freedom as well.
Understood. In 2009, because there was the belief from those who were aggrieved and those on the streets that the election was stolen from him, Mir Hossein Mousavi was the face of the protests and the Green Movement. This time there's no face. Has that hurt the protest movement that there hasn't really been a kind of a person to rally behind? There hasn't really been a leadership when it comes to what happened across these 80 towns and cities?
This is a good question. Listen, you mentioned that Mousavi was the face of protest in 2009. So what happened to that movement? They killed and oppressed everybody. So it doesn't matter where there is somebody who is leading the protest, or it's about the people who took the street and they leading the protest themselves. I'm going to tell you what happened this time. This time, women were fearless. Why? Because they were, working class women. They lost everything in their life. They've been beaten up by, the security forces, not in these demonstrations. Months ago, when they lost their saving, when they lost their, they haven't been paid their salaries for months, and they were asking their government, their MPs in front of the parliament, all of them were beaten up. So now they are fearless in front of the camera. They don't need Mousavi and Karoubi. They are the leader. They talk really loud. And it was a bunch of security forces in front of a woman, a working class woman. And she was saying that, I don't have any fear. And she was inviting all the people to join her to say, death to Khamenei.
Masih Alinejad, it's always a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. I thank you very much for joining us. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, Syrian forces press further into Idlib. What will this mean for the region? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.